I'm going to talk to you about watercoloring in a bullet journal. This is something that can be extremely intimidating, but it's really a lot easier than you think. And I'm going to give you 3 tips on what to use, focusing mostly on your bullet journal supplies, your watercolor supplies, and then some techniques that I found to be helpful when watercoloring in the bullet journal. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. So now for your bullet journal, I use a Scribbles That Matters bullet journal, which is a 160 GSM bright white thick paper. Archer and Olive is going to work as well. I'm not familiar with any other bullet journals that hold water quite as well, but those are the 2 that I've used and I've had success with. I am a firm believer in using what you have. So if you don't have one of those brands, you can either go outside of your bullet journal and watercolor on watercolor paper and glue it into your journal, or actually Archer and Olive has released these really cool like block pads. So that's even an option too. Again, you've got the bullet journal dot grids and stuff, and you can use that. Yeah, so that's, especially if you're using moleskin or Leuchtturm, I'd be very careful putting water in those guys. So now we're going to talk watercolor supplies. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the different kinds of paints and how they work. We're just going to touch on the different mediums. You get watercolor tubes. Those, I know I've bought cheaper ones from Walmart. So if you're just experimenting and you don't want to spend too much money, that's an option for you. You also get watercolor liquids. For example, the Eco line has a great line of watercolor liquids. You get the pans, and I'm very prone to the pans. I really enjoy them. And then you get the pencils. Now, again, I gravitate more toward the pencils and the pans because, at least for me, I'm better able to limit the amount of water that I add. Now, we'll get into the water in a second, but I just find that the pans and the pencils are way more forgiving. Also with the tubes, now one thing to note with watercolors, let's say you use your tubes and you squeeze too much out. The best part about watercolor is that when you're ready to use that color again, you just add water and it works again. So if you already have the tubes and you want to use the tubes, by all means, please go ahead. So like I said, I gravitate more toward the pens or the pencils. For a first-time watercolor bullet journaler, I would strongly recommend watercolor pencils. Again, if you haven't already purchased any others, watercolor pencils are so fantastic. You just go in, you color in, add your shadows, everything, and then you just carefully go in and you blend using water, which is actually super fantastic and easy to use. Now, in terms of watercolor supplies, I also wanted to add that you can use your brush pens, but just be prepared. You're either going to, you're more likely to oversaturate your page doing it with brush pens if you're drawing directly onto the page and then going in with water. Otherwise, you can use a blending palette, which is fancy code for a laminated sheet of paper or a piece of plastic. And if you draw on the piece of plastic and you're picking up the paint with a brush, it's not going to be as vivid and as opaque as, say, the pans, and definitely not the same as the pencils. So just keep that in mind. But again, use what you have. Just be prepared that you're going to get more of a pastel-y effect than necessarily the dark, vivid colors. I would definitely say that my go-to as a beginner, if I didn't have anything else, would be the pencils for the overall effect and usability. Now, my 3rd tip is centered around technique. When you want to limit the amount of water that you're using, yes, these bullet journals, the Archer and Olive and Scribbles That Matter specifically, can handle water, but there's a limit to how much water they can use. Now, you're still going to be using less watercolor less water than you would on watercolor paper. And so that's very important, is limiting the amount of water that you use. And I did speak to that in the previous section about the pans and the pencils versus the liquids and the tubes. So just keep that in mind. My next tip would be, and this ties into the water, is to work fast. So especially if you want to do blending. If you're blending your colors, you're going to want to hustle because it dries extremely quickly. So when I was doing my lettering with the ombre effect, it didn't quite get the same ombre effect as I would have liked, just because it was drying so quickly. So you have to work fast. Okay. My next tip, again, is more general watercolor tip. I would keep paper towel close by. That way you can use the paper towel to clean off your brush, but also to get the optimum amount of water. So for me, when I'm painting, my technique is to dip it in the water, dip it in the color, and then just dab it on the paper towel just a little bit, just to take away some of that liquid, so that the bullet journal doesn't become oversaturated. Also, everybody makes mistakes. The water is going to pool, and it's great to have the paper towel nearby that you can tear off a strip and just dab it ever so gently, just to soak up that pool of water. Okay, next up, keep 2 containers of water. I find I keep my pans cleaner when I have the 2 containers of water. One container is to wet the pan, the other is to clean my brush. And then that way, if you're using the clean water to wet the different pans of paint, you're not going to muddy them by mixing the colors or whatever color your water turns. Also, some people prefer to have 2 containers, one for cold colors, one for warm colors. That's an option too, but you just want to make sure to look after your supplies. Now, I hope you found today's video helpful. You can check out my blog. I have made a cheat sheet, a printable cheat sheet for you that you can check out. I've also linked the supplies down below, and you can check those out, as well as linking the supplies on my blog. And yeah, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, I'm by no means an expert. I've just been having a lot of fun experimenting and playing with watercolor in my bullet journals. So I thought I would share a beginner's guide to using this medium in your journal with success. So thank you for joining me today.